Only 2 years of its first democratic transition, Niger political stability truncated by military takeover. Is democracy under threat in the West African sub-region? Also on the program, free grains for Africa as Putin hosts African leaders in second Russia-Africa summit. Plus, our highlight of stories from across the continent. Welcome to Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for joining. Niger has been rocked by its fifth coup since it gained independence from France in 1960. Although the President Mohamed Bazoum has initially resisted the takeover, the military said in a statement signed by its chief of staff that it had decided to adhere to the declaration made by soldiers committing the coup. Bazoum, via social media, had called on citizens to resist the coup plotters that hard-won gains made in the country under his rule will be protected by democracy-loving patriots. However, the country's military said its decision to adhere to the declaration is to avoid a deadly confrontation between the different forces, which could provoke a bloodbath and impinge on the security of the population.
Ce jour, 26 juillet 2023, nous, forces de défense et de sécurité, réunis au sein du Conseil national pour la sauvegarde de la patrie, CNSP, avons décidé de mettre fin au régime que vous connaissez. Cela fait suite à la dégradation continue de la situation sécuritaire, la mauvaise gouvernance économique et sociale, réaffirmons notre attachement au respect de tous les engagements souscrits par le Niger. Nous rassurons la communauté nationale et internationale par rapport au respect de l'intégrité physique et morale des autorités déchues conformément aux principes des droits humains. Toutes les institutions issues de la 7e République sont suspendues. Les secrétaires généraux des ministères se chargeront de l'expédition des affaires courantes. Les forces de défense et de sécurité gèrent la situation. Il est demandé à tous les partenaires extérieurs de ne pas s'ingérer. Fait à Niamey le 26 juillet 2023, signé le président du CNSP. Les frontières terrestres et aériennes sont fermées jusqu'à la stabilisation de la situation. Un couvre-feu est instauré à compter de ce jour, de 22h à 5h du matin, sur toute l'étendue du territoire jusqu'à nouvel ordre. Fait à Niamey le 26 juillet 2023, signé le président du CNSP.
Now, let's get some perspectives to this issue. We have standing by via Zoom Dr. Chukwudi Victor Odeme, and also he's an expert of armed conflict security reforms, as well as Ambassador Dr. Oame Roy, an international security expert who joins us via phone. Thank you so much, Dr. Chukwudi and Dr. Oame, for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, let's begin with your assessment of the situation in Niger at the moment. Let me start with you, Dr. Chukwudi, so far.
Yeah, the situation in Niger is quite unfortunate. Unfortunate in the sense that Africa and the rest of the world has been preaching democracy, which is more like a government where the people have equal access to governance as much as the government. But that has not been the case recently. And we have had this concept of big man presidents in democracies in Africa, and West Africa in particular. And this is at the forefront of the resistance of the people, which is emphasized by incursion into governance by the military. It's unfortunate, though, even though some of us are beginning to wonder if military rule shouldn't be considered as a legitimate means of assent to government. But let's see how it goes.
Dr. Oame Roy, should we consider military rule as legitimate, going by the thoughts shared by Dr. Chukwudi?
Well, I appreciate Dr. Chukwudi's perception because I can see that he has dropped all of us on the fence. All right, let's look at it this way. Definitely, nobody is comfortable with obstructing a system. The system that is favorable in Africa today is democracy. And everybody wants democracy where it becomes a government for the people and by the people. But unfortunately, African leaders have adopted a new way to always compromise adherence to democracy, and they get so old in the system and die there. So many of the African presidents, governor, you will see a governor who wants to be a senator, from senator, they don't give in to the transfer of leadership to the next generation. So it becomes a challenge to really take a decision to say if coup d'etat is favorable or not. So that is the quagmire that we have found ourselves.
Talking about unmet expectations of democracy. Dr. Chukwudi, what's at the base of these coups that we have seen? It's like a trend. We've seen Mali. I mean, we're talking about more than 6 countries so far. What's at the base of some of these things, if you may?
It's still the same issue of legitimacy, the ability of the people who have come into office through the ballot to be able to stick to the tenets of democracy. I still recall that the basic definition of democracy is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But if you take a look at any of the African countries, in West Africa in particular, and juxtapose this definition of democracy to what is practiced in those places, you find out that we're not actually practicing democracy. So it leaves room for one to wonder what is going on. People are sent to become have ascent to the presidency or the highest office of the land, and the first thing they do is to cater for themselves and for their family. Look at the Nigerian National Assembly, for instance. I'm hearing that with the take-home of one senator or whoever is about 30 million naira per month, in a country where 30,000 naira is minimum wage. You see there's a very big disconnect between the government and the people. And that is the reason for all this back and forth in whether we should let them be or the people should actually look for another form of mandate of getting people into power. That's the foundation for all these agitations, like I said earlier, that keeps finding expression in the muzzles of the weapons of the soldiers, who are actually also citizens. You don't take that away.
Okay. Dr. Roy, is there any guarantee that the military itself will do any different, given the fact that some of the challenges that countries are facing is global? It's not peculiar to any country. I mean, talking about economic economic challenges, let me not say mismanagement, but talking about economic problems and the insecurity is across board. It's not peculiar to any country. So would the military do any different?
Well, we are aware that growing up, coup d'etat has been a kind of disruption. Military officers come in, take over government. There is bloodbath, and they try to disrupt a system that is perceived to be against the people, anti-people. Okay, so when we had that, we now found out that they hand over to democratically elected government by creating an interim government and handing over power to a democratic government, and the military goes back to the barrack. Why did they adopt that strategy? It was because of the check and balance of ECOWAS and AU. So AU and ECOWAS was a system put in place to organize control measures for African leaders, not to get extreme in the guise of becoming autocratic. So when we had this, military regimes quickly try to do an interim government and quickly try to hand over and bring out all the disgruntlement like corruption like what doctor just said now, paying themselves, exceeding minimum wage, abusing the rights of the people, so all those systems that we have been having. Our concern should be, where is ECOWAS? Where is AU? Where are those bodies that are supposed to be active when leaders exceed their legislative power? Where are those bodies that are supposed to sit on African countries and tell us to maintain status quo while in office? Where are they?
Oh, well, perhaps we should throw the same question to our co-discussant, Dr. Chukwudi. Where is the AU and the ECOWAS in all of this? I mean, the AU chair, in the person of Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, made a statement just weeks ago as to why and how his government will not tolerate, or his term as AU chair will not condone any coups on the continent. And this happened. So do you think that the ECOWAS has the capacity to walk the talk?
Let me just be point blank. ECOWAS does not have the capacity to walk the talk. In a paper I presented about 2 years ago in Sacramento, titled Accomplishing Peace and Security in Africa, the Human Security Imperatives, answers this question. The first point we need to take note of is that who are the members of ECOWAS? Who make up the ECOWAS Committee of Head of State? In that paper, I tried to describe them as the Committee of Synod. Find out how they emerged as presidents or head of states in their own states. Find out their relationship with the people before you are able to imagine what they can do. What ECOWAS does is that they are just self-serving. They want to be sure, however you find yourself into power, including those who came through the muzzles of the gun. Many of them actually came through coup. Once you find your way there, you want to preserve your stay and preserve your access to power and resources. So when that is the case, you know that these presidents or heads of states are disconnected from their people. They only go to ECOWAS and African Union, perhaps, to say things that do not represent the feelings of their own people. So they literally cannot do anything. They can't walk the talk. That's the simple part of it.
But Dr. Chukwudi, we know the role that Nigeria played, some years ago, let me not say a few years ago, but some years ago, we know the intervention that Nigeria, had in instances where there are undemocratic takeovers, unconstitutional governments. In Gambia, for instance, we know how, ECOWAS played a major role in, thwarting an attempt by the then President Yahya Jammeh to remain in power after an election. And we also know about AU's role in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and the rest of them. So don't you think that there's going to be a difference now that we have the Nigerian president as AU chair?
Anyway, it's too early to predict what he can do. It's too early to predict what he can do. And perhaps from his antecedents, we know that probably he may have to, sit up and achieve much based on the fact of coming from Nigeria. But again, we also know the role of African Union in the Nkurunziza's case. You find out that some of them, they set up committees who go to support the incumbent instead of going to do what the people want. So it's not a black and white thing. You come in because are Nigerians comfortable? Is Nigeria far away from having a coup itself? Look at the trend. Look at how people feel. Look at how the people have been, abused over the years. Military coups are just people, venting their anger, for inclusiveness and for people in governance to actually pay attention to them. So AU and ECOWAS can do a whole lot, I agree. But it's subject to, they themselves having their better footing at home before they can act in the general interest of Africans.
Okay, Dr. Owame, it's quite complicated, really, if you look at the response or the reaction of the citizens in those countries. So, for instance, in the case of Chad, in the case of, now we are talking about Niger, there have been protests by members of the public, and some of them are saying that, look, allow democratic governance to continue. So when you look at that, is that not something that will boost the ability of the multilateral organizations, AU and ECOWAS, to intervene in this instance?
I want to appreciate you and Doctor. Thank you for the little burst of laughter, because sometimes these things get traumatic and we can get sick inside. We won't know. So let me tell you something, sir. Let me tell you. The AU might and the ECOWAS might is enshrined on the capabilities of their individual states. Right now, individual states in Africa and West Africa, they are intimate with corruption. The military, the police, the internal security system, the internal governance system. So that cohesion to be able to come out, as we did in Liberia, as we did in Sierra Leone, is going to be a mirage. Now, let me come up again. Right now, as I speak to you, President Tinubu, immediately he took over, there were kidnappings and killings in Kaduna. There were kidnappings and killings in Plateau State. You know the worst one? There was kidnappings in Abuja. The same Abuja where we have our federal capital, where we have the Brigade of Guards, the elite military group standing firm. The prison was broken into, and thousands of bandits and terrorists were let loose. Now, see, let me tell you something. The ability of AU, as President Tinubu is the president now, and saying that Nigeria will not agree. The we is the army. The we is the Air Force. The Air Force has not been able to utilize the which we are still paying for.
But the response.
Navy. The same Navy is in the troubles of the bunkering and the oil.
Okay, Dr. Owame.
So there's no we.
Dr. Owame, the response of ECOWAS is not going to be mainly by the Nigerian armed forces. We are talking about ECOWAS. So you imagine that member states have, their own armed forces. So it's not going to be a Nigerian affair.
Without cutting you off, sir. Member states in Africa and ECOWAS, they look to Nigeria. Anytime we go out, I am a military veteran, sir. Anytime we go out, other states, other country military, they look to us. We are a leadership profile in countering coups or uprising in Africa. Even South Africa, we did might from here to support. Nigeria did might. So you can see that it's going to be a problem for other African countries to see a dilapidated leader that has not put his house together to be able to lead.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, Dr. Chukwudi, where do we go from here? How do we end this trend on the continent?
The answer is simple. Let me just say it's simple because it's simple. The essence of being in government is actually to serve the interest of the people. And you mentioned earlier about the economic downturn, which is a global phenomenon. Yes, we understand that, but we are not expecting the leaders to do magic. But show an understanding to your people that you understand what they are going through. Reduce the lages, extended to public office holders. This morning I was seeing, and like has been the practice, whenever the president is traveling, you see 50, 60, 100 vehicles on the queue. One fuel is being sold about almost 7,000 per liter in Nigeria. You see a retinue of staff. You see a retinue of public office holders. Once they get into power, they start building houses, marry new wives, start living large. When the people they are elected to serve are squandering in penury, nobody, I repeat, nobody, and I keep saying it, that military officers themselves are citizens. They are paid by the government. They have relatives who they support. Nobody will be happy that such a thing is happening. So the only thing that needs to be done is that governance, we're not saying you shouldn't enjoy the benefit of office, but let the people have that understanding that you sympathize with them and that you're willing to do the right thing. Whether you do it or not is a different thing. But show that empathy. Show that sign that you care. Show that sign that you are interested. Cut down on. Are you telling me now that if the presidents in Africa reduce their salaries by half, their citizens will not be happy? They'll be happy. They want something new, not business as usual. Once you depart from business as usual, things will go better.
Dr. Wame, your final words on this.
Well, my final word is this. Every African, West African country must take leadership at sacrifice. We must believe that we are there to serve. Any position you hold in governance or civil service, you must take it as sacrifice. Like Dr. just said, start by slashing your pay because all of them are enriched before they got there. So my own last word is leadership is sacrifice. Be sacrificial. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Chukwudi Victor Odeme and also Dr. Wame Roy, both security analysts. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. You're watching Africa Update on Trust TV. Coming up shortly, free grains for Africa as Putin hosts African leaders in second Russia-Africa summit. Join us again for more. Back. You're watching Africa Update on Trust TV. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin told African leaders he would give them tens of thousands of tons of grain within months, despite Western sanctions, which he said made it harder for Moscow to export its grain and fertilizers. Speaking at a summit in St. Petersburg devoted to Russian-African ties, Putin said that Russia was expecting a record grain harvest and was ready to replace Ukrainian grain exports to Africa on both a commercial and aid basis to honor what he said was Moscow's critical role in global food security.
African delegations arrive in St. Petersburg for a summit overshadowed by the war in Ukraine and Russia's efforts to mitigate its isolation. 17 heads of state joined this meeting, 18 fewer than the last summit 4 years ago in Sochi. Moscow accuses Washington of pressuring Africans not to attend the summit, where President Putin on Thursday promised substantial direct aid to the continent.
I am ready to grant at no charge from 25 to 50,000 tons of grain to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Eritrea in the coming months. In the next 3 to 4 months.
Russia called the summit as world tensions grow due to an increase in food prices following Moscow's withdrawal from the grain shipment agreements it had signed with Ukraine and Turkey.
Yes, it's very, very important because Russia is known for that fertilizer relation, because supplying of fertilizer to African countries from Russia is very, very profound.
But there is agreement on little else, and some at the gathering were preparing to call on Russia to halt its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Of all the participants, Obasanjola says only Russia appears interested in continuing the war.
African countries going to Russia to see how they can also put certain, pressure psychologically, of course, on Russia and Ukraine to come on, peace agreement.
Many in the West see the two-day summit as a propaganda move by the Kremlin to show that it is not cut off from the world. But observers say it is also an opportunity to speak frankly with Russian leaders on the need to bring peace to Ukraine.
Now time for us to take a look at Roundup Africa with Chiamaka Nwafo.
Mali has introduced a new constitution resulting in a significant change regarding its official language. Previously, French held the status of the country's official language since 1960. However, in a June 18 referendum, the new constitution was passed with an overwhelming 96.91% of the vote, leading to the removal of French as the official language. Under the revised constitution, while French will continue to be used as the working language, 13 other national languages spoken in Mali will be granted official language status. This move aims to acknowledge and preserve the linguistic diversity within the country. Notably, some of the local languages, including Bambara, Bobo, Dogon, and Minyanka, had already been granted national language status through a 1982 decree. The implementation of the new constitution marked the establishment of the Fourth Republic in Mali, carried out by the country's junta leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta. Mali's decision to drop French as the official language coincides with a broader regional context of growing anti-France sentiments across West Africa. Members of South Africa's main opposition party took to the streets Wednesday in Cape Town to protest a new law that allows racial quotas in the workplace, saying it will discriminate against minority whites, Indians, and mixed-race people. The South African government says the law is necessary because most companies are not following through on pledges to transform their workforce by hiring more qualified black South Africans. While black people make up an estimated 4/5 of the more than 60 million people in South Africa, the latest employment equity report from the government shows they hold only 16.9% of top management positions. Earlier this year, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed into law the amendment to the Employment Equity Act of 1998, giving the Minister of Employment the power to get targets for certain sectors. Companies that employ more than 50% will be affected. These companies must meet the targets within 5 years to enhance black representation in skilled, professional, and managerial positions.
And that wraps it up for Africa Update this week. You can watch more via all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. Join us next week for another time on the program.